Now, who is supposed to run the bureaucracy? The president or the Congress? I'll give you a hint. It's both and neither. The bureaucracy falls under the chain of command of the President of the United States. The bureaucracy is part of the executive branch. But remember, the president can't raise a single dime of money. The bureaucracy is paid for. Their salaries are paid for by the Congress of the United States, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. Therefore, congressional oversight is a part of the way bureaucracies work. And there are various committees within the Congress that supervise each bureaucracy. Now, if you have a conflict between the president and the Congress, and a bureaucracy seems to be involved, the president will try commanding the bureaucracy to produce certain types of information that favor his point of view, and the Congress will try to have a series of hearings where various leading bureaucrats have to testify under oath in a way that's going to, the congressional leaders believe, help their side of it. The truth is, the bureaucracy is supposed to be apolitical. It's supposed to do their job under the direction of the President of the United States and under the supervision of the Congress of the United States through congressional oversight. It's supposed to be a little bit of both. Now, what bureaucrats produce is called regulation. Regulation is not law. Regulation is a set of administrative guidelines and rules and regulations, strictures that determine how people are going to act under certain conditions in certain circumstances. Both employees of the federal government, people associated with that government in various emergency actions, or even private citizens if there's a crisis or an emergency. So when the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, whose brief it is to keep the air and water clean, makes a regulation that says that anytime you have a pool of water on your land made by a natural declivity for more than a few days, that qualifies as a wetland and then falls under the bureaucracy and under the direction of the Wetlands Bureau within the Environmental Protection Agency. Suddenly, a person like me in Maine, who had a trench in his yard, found that he couldn't utilize his own property the way he wanted to. I had a trench. It was determined by the EPA to be a wetland because it had a certain amount of water a few days every year, and they claimed jurisdiction. It was still my property, but I would have to follow their regulations using that portion of the property. A regulation is a rule the government sets that's supposed to be very specific to a very particular thing that the bureaucracy is involved with. In some ways, regulations can be more powerful than laws within their narrow field of focus. Regulations determine how much carbon can be emitted by automobiles, factories, and so forth. Also, Environmental Protection Agency. Other regulations determine that houses need to have fire escape windows, they're called egress windows, that if you have a public building, there needs to be handicapped access. These are all regulations. They're supposed to be narrowly enforced, but they are also very, very powerful. But they don't come from a politician. They don't come from an elected official. They come from a professional civil servant and the bureaucracy that civil servant works in. And as such, there is a degree of unaccountability that these agencies can have. And that is also something that we, the people, and our political representatives need to watch very closely through the congressional oversight process and also through the process of electing presidents who are going to appoint political appointees to make certain that regulations are not being used in place of laws. Laws are supposed to be big deal things that could change life as we know it. Regulations are supposed to be limited, focused things designed to manage a certain resource in a certain fashion. And regulations need to come under and need to operate under the guidance and the direction of the executive branch up to the president, and they need to be overseen by the Congress and the congressional committees in the House and Senate that pay their bills. Executive privilege is the notion that the president and his people deserve to have a certain degree of protection from subpoenas. What that means is, if I'm the president and I talk to somebody within the National Security Council and I say I'm concerned about the Chinese and what they have done to the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province, and I would like to devote Central Intelligence Agency assets to learn more about what's going on there. I, as the president, am in effect ordering an espionage act, spying inside another country. It happens all the time. The Chinese do it to us, we do it to them. Everyone does it to everyone, including allies. It's just the way the world works. But let's say somebody in Congress who is friendly to the Chinese Communist Party and its regime doesn't like the idea of CIA operatives inside the People's Republic of China. They might try to find out about it by subpoenaing my national security advisor, and if they can compel him under oath to divulge our conversation, suddenly I don't have my presidential authority to handle certain things in terms of foreign policy, intelligence policy, military policy. I don't have all of my powers as commander-in-chief of the military. Suddenly, if I have to mince my words and mealy-mouth everything with my own advisors, I cannot properly command the executive branch of government. Therefore, to prevent that, executive privilege is the protection that can be claimed by a senior official who works directly with the president or on presidential matters, that since the president is an equal branch of government with the Congress can ask for certain bits of information about the president, but they cannot ask for everything from everyone who works with the president, because in doing so, they destroy his ability to speak in confidence, behind the scenes, honestly, about policies that could be controversial if they were made public. The president also deserves the discretion of the people that work directly with him. He should have an expectation that they're not going to turn state's evidence against him, that they're not going to turn evidence to Congress as a political act of betrayal. Presidential executive privilege is something that presidents of both parties have claimed to congressional oversight committees of both parties that says, no, you can't ask the president's direct aides about this because it violates executive privilege and infringes on the freedom of action that the executive branch of government is supposed to have. Executive orders are, they're not laws. They're not bureaucratical regulations. They're somewhere in the middle. If the president is operating under the law in terms of how federal land is going to be used, and the president decides that he wants to allow more cattle grazing on certain types of federal land, the president can sign an executive order or an executive memorandum that orders the Department of the Interior and the Bureau of Land Management to allow more cattle ranchers access to grazing rights on federal land. If, on the other hand, the president wants to cut coal production and limit the exploration or exploitation of petroleum resources, the president might sign an executive order that restricts the ability for private companies to get fracking licenses, or that restricts the ability of people to open new coal mines or expand existing coal mines or build coal-powered power plants or oil-powered plants or all of that stuff. The executive can establish, through executive order or executive memo, certain regulations, but they are in no way supposed to be big, comprehensive, life-changing things like laws. I'll probably reference as an attached video a comedy skit from the Obama years about how executive orders might be used beyond their intended limited purpose. Up until the time of Franklin Roosevelt, the Depression, and World War II, executive orders were fairly small scale and fairly rare. From President Franklin Roosevelt to President George W. Bush, they were occasional. President Obama used them a lot. I don't believe President Trump is using them that much. But it's a way for a president to try to go around Congress if Congress is going to block him, and to try to get his way by commanding the bureaucracy to interpret the law that Congress has passed and to utilize the funding that Congress has authorized in a way harmonious to the president's policies. Next time, failed presidencies.